Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. Shot over 6 years by director Nico Ballesteros and drawn from an astonishing 3,000 hours, never before seen footage, in whose name is an unflinching chronicle of the life inside Ye's inner circle, captured by a then 18-year-old Nico Ballesteros, an aspiring filmmaker from Orange County with nothing but a camera, a story to tell, and unprecedented access to one of music's most polarizing and scrutinized public figures. Amazing film, in whose name we're joined today by the director, Nicolas Ballesteros, as well as one of the editors, Justin Stable. To both of you, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's just so much to talk about, not in just in terms of the raw story, the amount of time you covered in the life of Kanye West. And let's start at the beginning. Nico, how did you build up this relationship? Where did this start?
Yeah, for me, it started in 2015 when I was actually in Orange County still. And I was attending the Orange County School of the Arts. It was a conservatory-based school. And after standard curriculum, we would have art. And the art program that I was in was film and TV. One of the classes that I took during those 4 years was a documentary class. And for me, it was really resonant for a multitude of reasons. I think initially it had to do a lot with the fact that I was looking to find my place in the world outside of high school. Originally, I went to this performing arts high school in order to kind of gain what I thought was an edge to get into like a 4-year university, like a USC film school. But halfway through, I no longer felt called to that. I wanted to kind of get more into the real world. And, I quickly realized that I didn't have quite the perspective that I felt like I was required to have in order to really pull from my own life experience as a 15, 18-year-old. And documentary just was really resonant because it felt like it was something that I could utilize my coming of age truth and POV to also get an understanding more of the art of filmmaking. And it was also something very resonant with me because it's how I initially fell in love with the camera as an 8-year-old, as a 7-year-old, just kind of filming my everyday existence and then plugging the camcorder into the TV with the 3 prongs and watching the footage back and eventually learning how to edit by 11 and, also being inspired by YouTubers like Casey Neistat, Vice as well, which Justin was some important part of that, especially the Noisy channel, because then the Noisy channel was focused on hip hop and culture. So that also not only taught me about filmmaking, but also about culture. And that was something that I started to gravitate towards after this documentary class. Initially, I was looking into entrepreneurship because there was like a lot going on post, Social Network, Steve Jobs, those films were coming out, the Walter Isaacson book. And I was on email threads to people like Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, and just different people like looking to find a subject for a documentary as I felt like it was applicable to my situation and I could be of service to that field. I also had watched the Errol Morris documentary, Fog of War. And for me, when I saw that, I was really intrigued because of the way that they utilized a teleprompter to interview the subject and how they kind of were able to innovate, in this format. That was kind of like something that intrigued me just from a place of cinematography and direction. And then I started to study more, and what I found most interesting to me was the documentary mode of observational filmmaking or like just pure cinema verite, the JFK doc from the 60s or, just things like that. So, or even like the Gimme Shelter doc, although that did have interviews, just that kind of style. I started to study it. Ye became this figure in my orbit because around junior year of high school, I started to kind of like change friend groups a bit. And there were these kids who were wearing different types of clothing, like skate, hip hop, high fashion kind of blends, Supreme. And, it was like an era in 2015 where because of Instagram, there were so many new trends that were kind of simultaneously happening. Then there was like this democratization of celebrity culture. And with the influencer, there were so many new creative responsibilities that became career paths because the need for content, drove a micro economy that quickly became something, the total accessible market quickly expanded. And, creative directors, stylists, videographers, personal photographers, all were, actual career paths, right? And someone like Ye had always had someone following him around. And when my friends took me to the AMC where Ye was doing a live stream of his Madison Square Garden performance in 2016 of the Life of Pablo album and a Yeezy season fashion show, it was at that moment that I kind of saw not just like the ability for him to produce music, but also culture and talent and this zeitgeist. And it was there that I saw someone following the Kardashians and Ye with the VHS camera. And his name was Tyler. And then Tyler, when Ye went to the hospital, went on to go work with Travis Scott, and they did a documentary called "Look Ma Like a Fly." So there was an opening in Ye's orbit, and throughout my latter years of high school, I really became a part of the subcultural terrains that Ye pulled so much young talent from. People like Tyler, other people like Tremaine, Emery, Gabe. There was a lot of people that I became friends with, and they became my mentors. And these were the people that texting, and they were like already with Ye when I was still in high school. So by the time that I got out of high school, within 6 months, Ye invited me to come film because he was kind of aware of this ecosystem of talent, like I was kind of explaining earlier.
Well, Justin, I know that Nico shot 3,000 hours worth of video as part of the editing team. But anyway, so Justin, where did you come into this?
I've known Nico since he was 17, 18 years old. Always saw him as a great young talent, great young documentary filmmaker. I had a lot of previous documentary experience talking about social issues in America through a pop culture lens. And we had always, I had hoped to work on the project with him. Frankly, it's a dream project to work on for me and a great collaborator next to me here. So I knew him through the times when he was shooting, those 6 years amassing the 3,000 hours. And I came on, what year was it that I came
Well,
on?
initially, we first started to really take a crack at this in 2021, right? And that was a failed attempt on my part because I was still in production and I was trying to be one foot in production, one foot in post production. And I'll let him get into it more, but I just wanted to say, it was because I was pulling from my own memory opposed to actually going through all the thousands and thousands of hours of footage to really let the narrative present itself to me. I was thinking, oh, these certain sessions or these certain meetings are the precipice of the story. And there were just so many dead ends. They were great vignettes, great 15-second, maybe TikTok reels, but there was no story there. And everything was very tangentialized. And that's really where Justin and Shy and other people really came in with the edit and the story to help piece it together because we had to actually pull multiple takes. It's almost like we had multiple takes because I was filming so much and Ye would kind of be on the same train of thought for sometimes a day, sometimes a week. So whether he was meeting with a Charlie Kirk or a Spike Jones, a lot of the themes and the through lines were being repeated within a certain time period, right? So we were actually taking moments because everything was so pure verite that there were interjections or other noises or maybe just like the thought wasn't properly finished or articulated. So, from a journalistic integrity point of view, everything was truthful, but we had to sometimes take multiple like takes as if we were cutting like a film.
Yeah, the story at that time was unfolding in real time because, as he said, he was still filming and such explosive, usable footage because we're talking about one of the richest black men in U.S. history, one of the biggest celebrities in the world, and here we have intimate access to his everyday life. So it wasn't until 2022 when Nico was able to remove himself from culture completely to take an objective view at what the story could be that the team reassembled and we were able to kind of log and rewatch the 3,000 hours and come up with the cohesive theatrical story, which we presented last Thursday and has been rolling out all weekend across the nation here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I will get into this because the reaction has been incredible. I didn't know what to expect. I'll be honest with you. Watching this, wasn't sure, knowing what I know about Kanye and his, the last 10 years of his life have been fairly chaotic. Who knows? There's just so many things, and they're in the film. There's so many of the things that I'm talking about right now that are part of the landscape of this film, which just is, and it's sprawling. I'll put the word sprawling in our conversation in terms of not just him, the world he inhabits, the people that have access to him and he has access as well to,
Right.
is I don't know if there's beyond the president of the United States and very few other people in the world. I don't think many people have this level of access to this diverse group of people in the world.
Mike, that's such a great point, and it's so sometimes unsettling even because yeah, I mean, you don't sometimes realize the magnetism of what you're making, and to see some of these people who are no longer with us in the film, whether it's a Charlie Kirk or a DMX or a Virgil Abloh, may God rest their souls. It's so deep to realize that with the changing state of affairs in America or just the world in general, that this document, this person within this document, such a living, breathing kind of testimony to the times that we're living in. I think that also speaks volumes to the editing process. 1 year after I stopped filming, I spent an entire year watching the 3,000 hours down multiple times. So much so to the point where, no stone was left unturned. Eventually, we got it down to 1,000 hours, right? And that process was just through going through Premiere Pro. Each sequence was maxed out at 24 hours. And Jack, who was another editor on the project, went through it all, trimmed the completely unusable moments and just like the true fat, but left 70 to 80% of every clip. And every clip, I would film on an iPhone for 6 hours, 8 hours sometimes, one clip, because every moment was so poignant that I didn't want to ever stop. So once we got it down to the 1,000 through just bumping clips up on the timeline to other video tracks, I kind of created this very like simplistic selection process. We then transcribed everything. And after the transcriptions, the transcription process was very specific too, in the sense that we had, of course, dialogue, action, but even like we devised like a cinematography tagging system and like thematic tagging system and a few other miscellaneous notes. It was very much like a programming language, even in the sense of like what we put in brackets, what we put in parentheticals, what we put in parentheses, etc. Then this was all done in Premiere on both the clip level and the timeline marker level, in the sense of I'm sure there's better systems out there, but this is just what I was called to do. And the reason why it was on both was because if we moved a clip, it was only being moved if it was on the marker, was only being moved if it was on the clip. However, in order to print everything out, it had to be on a timeline. So we had to like, copy and paste everything. It was very just hands-on. And again, I think, now I have so many ideas. The team has so many ideas on how to improve this process, but we were just taking no shortcuts to make sure that we really understood the story. So that all got printed out, and then it got all individually cut. So we had 9,000 individual strips of paper. These 9,000 strips of paper were then posted on bulletin boards one by one, all numbered as well by hand. I would go through these every day for about a week, and there was a maze of these bulletin boards standing on wheels, both sides. I'd go with markers and pens and like little stickers. We, created scene cards and paper edits and things like that. And that's when we really got it down to like 10 hours. And then, that was like the first string out, when we call it like the board pool kind of string out assembly. And then when we connected with Justin to make our first vomit draft, the war broke out in the Middle East. And that was the exact day that I stopped filming 1 year prior to the whole DEF CON scenario that you see in the movie. So you have to imagine there are multiple layers to this, in the sense of how the perception and the weight and the story was like still happening as we were putting this together. In many ways, and even some of the controversies that occurred a few months ago, we were still closing the edit at that time, picture locking it, So there were so many things that were going on in our peripheral as we were doing justice to the story that I had documented from 2018 to 2022, with that little prelude that you saw, was just like about a 30-45 minute period of time that I spent with him in 2024, where I filmed him. And that's the epilogue. To your point, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that was a moving target, and someone like Justin was a really integral part in just distilling the truth of what is there in that footage. Because we were so honest and true to the mode of documentary filmmaking that is observational, we weren't providing the context through narration or interviews. So the only other thing we had was making the media a character and kind of that juxtaposition between the access that I had when it was full screen and then putting the media into that kind of the box.
Widen out a little bit, if you will, cinematically and story-wise. The fact that Kanye West, yeah, is so endlessly fascinating. The fact that you really had to go through all of this footage in order to be able to tell the full story, because there are so many aspects to his life, to his state of mind, to who he is, to the people in his life. There's, I, it just, I can't imagine that this will, in some future world, be a 4 or 5 part series somewhere. We'll be able to watch,
Oh, absolutely.
some version of this. But Justin, it just going back to, and this all is predicated on what a fascinating person he is and what a fascinating world he lives in. In your travels, you were with Vice and all. Have you ever seen anything like this, a story of this sort of complexity before?
No, I haven't. It's an incredibly inspiring individual, and it was most shocking when I was watching the footage that this is an individual who every day wakes up with such a fire to create 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, often multiple days without sleep, every day, 365 days a year without days off. And I haven't really encountered individuals like that before. People will go on vacation, they'll want to take a beat to reorganize, but this is how he came to so much success in all these different fields in music and architecture and design and of course in apparel, dominating some of those spaces. And
Yeah.
seeing that work ethic match with his creativity was incredibly inspiring, and I had never encountered that, and left us with troves and troves of usable footage.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is a month's worth of viewing for. I mean, you could turn this into a season's worth of if you wanted to. But I want the filmmaking, Nico. I mean, this is utterly fascinating in terms of just the logistics of it, the way you were describing how this all came together. But at the end of the day, this is about relationships. Your relationship with Kanye, the relationship with the people in his life. Obviously, saw something in you other than the people that he knew you knew and had worked with, that he trusted you, so implicitly trusted you, not only with the filming of what you were seeing in real time, but in putting this together. I'm curious, and you don't have to betray too much here, but how much did Kanye feel like he needed to weigh in on what this final product looked like? Is he okay with it? I mean, it was sort of question. It begs the question. Now that
Yeah.
it's out, now that you're seeing what we're seeing, where did he, if at all,
Yeah.
come into the creative process?
I mean, it was very cathartic for him to see this film. I played it for him in 3 different iterations throughout the last like maybe year or so. The most recent being a few weeks ago when I showed him the final cut, the print, the DCP. So yeah, I believe a lot of it has to do with the fact that the point of view was that of coming of age for me. The youthfulness was something that allowed me to be that fly on the wall, a mixture of openness and just also stillness too, a silent observation. And I think that's even what he meant when in the film you see him say, when you're filming, you're not just filming, but you're also understanding what it could be. It just being the through line of the film. And that was actually one of the first times that he actually spoke to me. So it's not like he got that from us having conversations. It was more so, I think, just through his creative intellect and sensitivity, he was aware of what I was feeling into and like my receptivity to, their ability to kind of pull these ethereal notions down into reality and create not just products, but products that are extremely commercially valuable and tangible. Also, some of these other ideas that were also outside of that whole world too, just about the human beneath, the idolatry of it all. I believe that is where a lot of the beauty is in this project
Yeah.
is the fact that I was so young. And by the time I was 22, I started to intuitively feel like it was time for me to go into that edit. And that's why I attempted it in Donda 2021, to be more specific, when he did the concerts after the divorce. I just like I was explaining, the story was still happening so fast. I wasn't really just ready to completely eject, because in order to do it, I had to not just leave the world of Yay, but remove myself from culture. I changed my phone number. I got off social media. I left society. I lived in the jungle. I was in Costa Rica for a year. It was a big life-changing decision to do something like that. And there was a multitude of factors that were required. But one of them was, Jack, who's another editor on the project, coming in literally a week or so prior to me filming the last act of the film, which was filmed over a couple months from essentially August 2022 to November 2022. And Jack came in, who was also a part of the previous failed attempt. And he started to watch the footage back like we had talked about and started to actually string it out. Mind you, because I was the only one, doing this, I was so protective over all the data and all the footage that I didn't allocate anyone else throughout the years to organize it. And because it was shot on iPhone, especially like back in the day, like 2018, now you could plug an SSD into the back of, your phone through a USB-C cable and through a Blackmagic app, transfer the footage in real time. But back then, AirDrop wouldn't even really work. I mean, AirDrop was failing constantly. And, also because the content was so intense at all times, like I was talking about, I wasn't stopping every like 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. These were 5, 6, 8 hour long iPhone clips. So sometimes I wasn't able to dump these clips, and I would have to just go buy another iPhone on a credit card and keep it going. And in the end, I had probably 20 iPhones. Half of them were still full, and I had 50 plus hard drives. And truthfully, none of it was organized. So Jack had to get all of this data, figure out where things are. And we kind of started to do this a bit in 2021, but we had to really do it properly now in 2022. And we had to figure out what the chronological order was, because everything was kind of just honestly all over the place. Because again, you're dealing with such a sensitive subject matter, and like it's just me doing it. There was no infrastructure throughout the years. I had to keep recording. I filmed every day for 15 to 18 hours a day. So, there was no time to simultaneously organize this stuff. We put it all on a server. That was the big first step, putting it all on a server. And I went into the last era of filming with him, now seeing for the first time some of the real truth of the story, breaking through the cracks. So now I'm shooting it with so much intention, like I never was before. Now I'm like shooting like from when I say intention, I mean like just from a cinematography lens. And the iPhones were more developed. You could zoom in now and do different things. And that's like one of the clips that you see with him putting the contact in the eye. I was like studying something like the wrestler Aronofsky's film with Mickey Rourke like a week prior to shooting that. And, I knew going into that last era, the last push, that this was the climax. And I didn't obviously anticipate what that climax was going to be, but quickly he started to say things like, I'm going to get out of the Adidas deal. I'm going to get out of all these contracts. That was within the first like week or so of me filming, that time period. I didn't know what that really meant. No one knew what that meant, but I was like, there's definitely going to be an ending here, so it was that mix with also me feeling like I came of age and my service now needs to go into the post, because my youthfulness, is wearing out. And that was, I think, what allowed me to just have that energy throughout all those years and build that relationship in that way to get that story.
Nico, you have now spent all this time with Ye and his world on a very personal level. What's your takeaway from knowing him over this period of time? Whatever relationship you have with him now, I don't know. It's not my business, but I'm just kind of curious in terms of, do you ever step back and say, I just spent 8 years or whatever, 6, 8 years with one of the most consequential artists of the 21st century? What impact does that have on you as an artist, as someone, as a creator, but also just on a personal level, like getting to the people that you talked to or you met, you were in the same room with,
Yeah.
it's I just can't even imagine. What is that?
Yeah,
Which
I don't have the Tom Cruise like minority report in front of me to really know the data here, but I would say, he's definitely probably top three when it comes to the people that I spent the most time with in my entire life.
Here you go.
So, with all that being said, and I've been saying this, like this whole journey for me has always been just seeing the human beneath the idol.
Yeah.
Someone who was even an idol to me when I first started this journey, as a 16-year-old thinking about who this person is in relationship to culture. And the first week, all that kind of started to get stripped away because we're seeing the vulnerability of him talking to people like Pharrell about this being a documentary about his mental health. Not to mention also in the time between me starting to film him and me first getting this idea, he went to the hospital. So I already knew that the depth and the gravity of this project is much deeper than something that is just about culture. It's about the depths of being an artist and kind of when you go out into those far out places, kind of some of those consequences on just your mind and spirit. I always knew that this was something that was akin to, an aviator or There Will Be Blood or like a Phantom Thread, like the Paul Thomas Anderson. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson seems to have a couple actual comps in there to this. So I always leaned into that. And other than that, though, there was always like objectivity and journalistic integrity because I went to school, even though I was like 15 in these classes, like I still got like a rudimentary understanding of what it meant to be a journalist or a documentary filmmaker to create distance from your subject. But other than that, I feel like have been able to actually creatively make this film because of not just the team that I've had around me, like Justin, Jack, Shy, and everyone else, but because of undeniably the access that I had to understanding and observing and extracting the positive elements of the creative process from him and everyone around him. That was like the first thing that I started to really quietly observe with so much gratitude, even before I was immediately assuming this role and this is going to be my identity in this life. I was thinking this is like me getting the golden ticket into the Willy Wonka factory and I'm Charlie and I get to see how the chocolate's made, or I'm inside of the silver factory, the Warhol, and how do they screen print or how do they create pop culture, more importantly. And yeah, a lot of me sitting down with him and showing him the film on a creative level. I mean, it was like showing, my creative mentor, my thesis project for the first time. It was definitely like being up in like Central St. Martin's or something for sure.
People talk about the school of Ye, Matthew Williams, Virgil Abloh, Demna, Heron Preston, Jerry Lorenzo, all these folks.
That were part of this project.
Output of that.
Whether you know who Kanye West is or Ye, or we have an opinion about him, I urge everyone to see it because it blows up a lot of those preconceptions that you would have of him. I think most people would have of him. You see an exceedingly talented, very intelligent, very intuitive person who has demons, who struggles with mental illness, who is apparently volatile at times, but his energy is just off the charts in terms of when he throws himself into something, it is, I don't know how to describe it. And the fact that he is so able to pull so many people along with him, whether they even think it's a good idea or not, is really something to behold. There's some scenes in here with the church scenes, with the woman that he goes back to Chicago and ends up the woman who knew his mom, lived across the street from his mom. There's so many moments in this film with Kim, with Chris, with whoever in this film, where there's a rawness to him. And some people will not like it. Some people will be drawn to it like I am, just to understand how this very compelling personality works and how he's able to make his way through the world after many, many mistakes along the way and his perseverance. There's just a lot to take in here. And I don't even know if I have a good question here to ask. I'm just an observation here.
Well, that was certainly the intention, and I think I'm overwhelmed personally by the response. I'm so thrilled. Numbers are coming in now, and it was always meant to be a theatrical experience. And I'm really proud of Nico for seeing that through. In a streaming age, he wanted to go to theaters. We've done it, and the response has been momentous and overwhelming for sure.
Yeah,
Good.
and to your point earlier, Mike, yeah, we're definitely, now that this is out in the world and it's starting to have a relationship with, audiences, we do have so much more footage and we are getting offers from streamers and people do want to see more. And, the truth is, not only did I want to go to theaters because, I wanted to just pay homage to the craft and just respect the process of, the founding fathers, but I, obviously ran into a lot of difficulty with this film because of the controversies surrounding the subject and how they were evolving and changing in real time, like I was speaking about earlier. So it was important for me to maintain Final Cut. I didn't want this to be a hack job. I wanted to make a beautiful portrait, like I talked about in my LA Times article, something that's just real and human. I found if I were to go in other directions and, give people what they maybe would have thought on paper was what they wanted, which would have been an out the gate 3-4 part series, it wouldn't have been something as pure as even this is, let alone as pure as it could be with even more dynamicisms to it, with or more dynamic range to it with some of those insights to the creative process of his. We had to kind of Trojan horse the situation here with independent filmmaking partners, Simran at AMC and my manager Nick Jarjor, to begin this process, this rollout with putting this out in theaters to just start the conversation and see where it goes from there. But the truth is, yeah, my first cut was, or my first string out was 10 hours, and then my first vomit draft with Justin was 6, and then the first cut we were like, oh, this is actually watchable, was 3 hours, right? And the truth is that version just doesn't play well unless it's broken up. It's very, very difficult to sit there, unless if you're a mega fan, which I know, I have a lot of respect for those as well. It's very difficult for the majority of audiences to sit there and watch a 3-hour movie in theaters. I think there's more to this story, of course, to expand upon.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to add one last thing to that. My observation about him is all the things that we talked about earlier, but also the enormous pressure brought to bear on him in the most loving kinds of ways. We see backstage after one of his shows, Pharrell, Chris Rock, Jay-Z, we see all of these people telling him, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life, what you just did. I mean, these are all accomplished artists, musicians, people who are very gifted at what they do, telling you that they've never seen anything better in their life. Now, some of this is, puffery. People do it, but at the same time, it's a constant stream of you're a genius. How do you top yourself? How do you unsort all of that and move forward to be true to yourself? Is another testament to him as a person. I can't imagine that level of scrutiny and expectations. And I think that's one of the reasons why he has these outbursts, if you will, to just sort of break his mind of all the kind of noise that he hears, I'm sure, on a regular basis. So another way of, I guess, for me to connect with him, to see that humanity in this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
He holds himself to a very high standard. I mean, if he wasn't going and getting that reaction, he would be disappointed in himself. And he did it time and time again throughout the 6 years you see on screen there. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I am honored to have you on the program to talk about this remarkable documentary film. Congratulations to both of you. Nico, I really appreciate the work that you did here, your commitment, and the happenstance, the circumstances of life that brought you to this, and then you had the wherewithal, the determination, and the talent to bring it to fruition. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. And the film, again, is called In Whose Name, the documentary film about Kanye West. And we've been speaking with the director, Nico Ballesteros, and one of the editors, part of the production team, Justin Staple. To both of you, thank you so very much for your time.
Thanks, Mike. An honor to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.